Intel's not quite so fab. Nokia's optics look great. Qualcomm and IBM are going to work together on GenAI. Bye bye Skype. Cloud costs are ballooning. Aviz supports NVIDIA Spectrum X, and China is somehow getting their hands on some hot new hardware in this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown for Wednesday, March the 5th. It is Ash Wednesday. To all those that celebrate, is that what you do? I don't know. I know there was a lot of celebration yesterday because it was Fat Tuesday, and hopefully you didn't partake of the national drink of New Orleans. Well, I guess it'd be the city drink, because it's also National Absinthe Day today. A little hair of the dog never hurts you, but if you start hallucinating and seeing things, you're drinking pure essence of wormwood. One person who never hallucinates and is always ready to go with great news stories, of course, is my co-host, Alistair Cook. Al, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom. As always, it is a pleasure to be here with you. And unlike many generative AI, I try to keep the hallucinations to in my sleep, not in my day work. And consequently, staying away from the absinthe seems like a good move. And I did have to look up what a cheese doodle is, because that's not something we have in New Zealand. So and where you are, it is National Cheese Doodle Day as well. Happy snacking.
Exactly. Well, make sure you wipe all the orange off of your fingers, because we have a lot of news stories we're going to cover. And if you're going to leave a comment on this, we don't want to have your orange fingerprints everywhere. We're going to start off with a story about Intel, because their future Ohio fabrication facility looks like it's going to be pushed out a little bit further. The factory is now projected to be opening sometime in the year 2030, with operations to begin in 2031. Now, if you remember all the way back when this originally was announced, that opening date was supposed to be 2025. But of course, Intel has faced a number of delays when it comes to getting this thing built and off the ground. Reports about the delay have mentioned some of the recent financial struggles that Intel has been facing as the primary cause for the delay. But there's also a lot of uncertainty around the CHIPS Act and how that could be used in future investments. But also, if the CHIPS Act does end up going away, how that might hamper efforts to get this Ohio fabrication facility built. Al, do you think Intel's ever going to get this thing done?
Well, I've got to start with Intel's commitment to Ohio is still strong. This is one of the paraphrased statements in the releases about this. So Intel is definitely committed to Ohio. So please continue, Ohio politicians, to support Intel's desires and intentions. That's the way US works, as I understand it. It's unfortunate to see these kinds of delays. We would have liked to have seen this new fab up and operational by now. I'm sure Intel would like to have been in the position where they could actually be shipping chips out of it as planned this year. It definitely is a sign then that the headwinds are against Intel at the moment. We haven't seen, and we've commented on this a couple of times on the rundown, we haven't seen the pace of innovation and the leadership that we previously have seen from Intel for a while. And so the commitment quite some time ago to build this fab might have been more about the confidence that Intel was going to be the business it used to be. We're seeing that lunch that Intel used to rely on being eaten by other chip vendors, and I think that definitely is a big impact on their ability to execute on building a new fab. These things ain't cheap to build. There's pretty serious cost to building out a new fab and building up that process. And of course, like all of these things, you invest that money up front, you don't get any return on it for quite some time. So you have to have a very strong cash flow to weather it out. Delays in construction aren't unusual, though, so let's not frame this as being entirely about Intel and the headwinds for Intel. It's not unusual for construction projects to go over budget and over time. Anybody who's done house renovations or house building has experienced this before. So this is a complex thing. It is disappointing to see the delays, and I think there's a whole host of uncertainties for Intel that would really like to see them get back into some leadership and getting some strength back in the business, because many of us have a really strong affection for Intel and the innovations and the careers that some of us have built around the prevalence of Intel products. Nokia has completed the acquisition of Infinera, one of the largest optics companies in the industry. The team will become part of the optics networks business, while former CEO David Hurd will be joining the Network Infrastructure Group as Chief Strategic Growth Officer. Is he going to get taller? This acquisition was announced back in June 2024. Tom, what's happening with Nokia? What's changing that they want to acquire an optical business unit?
Well, if you look at some of the stuff that we've been talking about with Nokia over the last, I don't know, 6 or 7 months, they are very strongly trying to build out their data center fabric portfolio. And I don't know about you, but a lot of data centers that I work in are not running copper cables. I mean, they might run copper CX4 connectors from the top of the rack down to the servers, but realistically speaking, to kind of get the high speed that people really want, that's all optical. And for Nokia, this is kind of like a defensive play, right? By acquiring Infinera, they get all of the optical chops that they need to really kind of build this out. I think what you're going to start seeing in the near future is more work on doing some really, really creative things. I'm going to rewind to a previous Tech Field Day session that's actually listed on our Best of Tech Field Day playlist if you head over to youtube.com and click on that, from Andy Bechtolsheim of Arista, where he pointed out that one of the challenges of getting faster network support above 800 gigabits per second is in fact not the quality of the glass and the fiber, it's the amount of heat that is generated by those optics. And that has been one of the reasons why a lot of companies have started using co-packaged optics in their networking gear, or even research into things like silicon photonics. Well, if you're Nokia and you just bought one of the largest optical vendors in the world, do you think maybe they're doing some work on co-packaged optics if they haven't already released that? I'd say they are. Do you think maybe they've done some research into silicon photonics in order to keep growing past that big heat barrier? Yeah, I'd say they probably have. So I see this as Nokia's way of really kind of building into the future of what data center fabrics are going to look like. And, it can't hurt any of their other business too, because they have a very big routing business that's built a lot of service provider networks. And honestly, when you think about the other side of Nokia with all of the carriers, I mean, those towers are linked by fiber too. Why not buy the optics from the in-house manufacturers as opposed to having to farm them out to some other manufacturer where you might end up getting lower quality hardware that could potentially impact your customer satisfaction scores? I think this is a very smart move. And the fact that the acquisition closed in just 6 months and they've already figured out where everybody's going to go bodes well for them in the future. Qualcomm Technologies and IBM plan to run Watson X governance, Granite Guardian 8B and Granite 3.1, 8B models on Snapdragon 8 Elite reference designs and the Qualcomm Dragonwing AI on-prem appliance solution with the Qualcomm AI Inference Suite. Al, I'm not going to lie, it took me like 3 takes to get through all of those things. But here's the question that I've got for you. Is this product named soup going to end up being a big deal for IBM and for Qualcomm?
It's an interesting collection of announcements, and this came to us through our good friend Ron Westfall at the Futurum Group. He was at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona where this follow-on announcement came. So it sits as a way of running non-cloud delivered generative AI models and using Qualcomm hardware rather than NVIDIA hardware to deliver those. So maybe this is going to allow us to have other kinds of accelerators delivering AI models on premises, particularly for those of us who struggle to be able to buy the NVIDIA Blackwell chips that are driving some of the largest cloud inference environments and AI environments. So I think there's some fairly significant things in here. Qualcomm and IBM aren't the names that come to front of mind when we talk about generative AI. But if we roll back to more conventional AI, Watson was pretty much our defining, here's a whole set of capabilities for AI before generative AI became the big thing. And there's some significance there. There's these 8 billion parameter models in their Graphite Guardian and Graphite. these are pretty significant, and being able to run those on a variety of different kinds of chips, particularly things that we can actually deploy on premises. Now, the reference solution, this Dragonwing uh, appliance, and the AI inference suite that runs on top of it, yeah, reference implementations are really important. They're typically not what you end up deploying in the real world. We really want to get all the way through to reference architectures, fully building out an infrastructure for maybe running multiple racks rather than 2 or 3 systems. But we definitely want to have more options when it comes to these hardware accelerators that are going to make generative AI part of our core applications, and to get some of that return from building all of these huge AI models. So yeah, I think this is a fairly significant deal. It depends a little bit how the implementation rolls out. So what we really want to see is some customers actually using this, some customers deploying real applications and getting business value out of using different types of accelerator that are more accessible. One of the pioneering internet services is going to be shut down in May. Microsoft announced that Skype will be sunset on May 5th, 2025. The VoIP tool's been around for over 20 years, and at one time boasted some 300 million users, including me, for many years. Microsoft bought the company back in 2011 and has been slowly migrating users and features to their more commercial offerings, because of course Skype's business model was about you get dial in, dial out was what they charged for, but peer-to-peer communication, well, customers were really paying for that because it was all peer-to-peer. Microsoft announced that users should begin migrating their contacts and chat data to Microsoft Teams, which itself is a descendant of Microsoft's Skype for Business that had sort of 10 years of play. But is it really time for Skype to hang up? Is this really the end of one of the pioneers of peer-to-peer internet-connected applications, Tom?
Raise your hand if you still had Skype installed anywhere. I don't see a lot of hands. It's really weird. No, it's actually not really weird. Here's the thing. Microsoft got everything they wanted out of Skype. Love it or hate it, Teams is, well, honestly, it's more than just the thing you used to call Microsoft employees. They have managed to make Teams an integral part of a lot of organizations through clever licensing through Microsoft 365. And I'll freely admit, when you give it away, it makes it very appealing to people. But what ultimately did Skype in was the pandemic. And I know you're sitting there thinking to yourself, well, wait, didn't Microsoft buy them like in 2012? And didn't they start sunsetting the Skype services back in 2015? And everybody remember Skype for Business, right? Yeah. You know what killed Skype ultimately? This video. If we had stayed a VoIP world with no video calling, I don't think this would have been a problem, because that is what Skype is known for, right? It is the pioneering VoIP application of the internet. When you look into the way that Skype actually used to operate, where instead of trying to tunnel through firewalls, it would have its client poke itself through on the way back out, that was groundbreaking for the early 2000s. And now we just expect that behavior. But more importantly, we expect all of our tools to be rich communications, chat, video, audio. I'll admit, when we first started doing the Tech Field Day stuff, me and Steven and our other employees, we were on Skype all day long. Like, we had a chat room on Skype, and when it's time for a phone call, we used a Skype phone call. That's how we worked. But we eventually grew to the point where we didn't need to just go searching through Skype chats to figure out what information we needed. That's when we grew and changed and started adopting other tools, like Slack is a good example. And now in 2025, most people look at Teams as a Slack competitor. They don't look at it as a superset of Skype. It's time for this to go. Let's be fair. Nobody uses Skype anymore. There are better tools out there. There are tools that are free. I mean, yes, if you sat anyone in the millennial generation down and played them the audio of a Skype call ringing in, they'll know what it is. But they'll also be able to recognize the theme from Jeopardy or a whole bunch of TV shows that are no longer on the air. So I think that this is a good move, ultimately, in the long run. And let's be fair, If all it means is that Microsoft gets to donate the Skype logo to the Computer History Museum, then we'll all be better off for it. If for no other reason, then I don't have to pick up another Skype call. Alistair, waste seems to be a pretty big buzzword as of late, and of course, the enterprise cloud market is no stranger to waste. According to a recent report from IT Pro, enterprises are set to spend an additional $44.5 billion that they don't need to in the cloud. The report says that something like 21% of that spend is from underutilized resources. But in a move that probably doesn't shock anyone, 52% of all that waste was blamed on a lack of synergy between developers and the FinOps teams. You want to guess why? Well, developers see cost optimization as somebody else's problem, and then they want to get things done as fast as possible. So they provision the biggest resource they can find and run it until, well, they don't need it anymore, or maybe they'll just leave it running and it'll just keep racking up bills. So, Al, I guess the important question here to ask is, how are we going to be able to balance the needs of our developers with, well, reality in the cloud?
And I think you really hit the key word there is balance. That waste is inevitable. If you think about any corporate resource, there is always resource that we're paying for that is idle, whether it's meeting rooms that are not currently in use, or whether it's cloud compute instances that are running at 10% utilization on their resources. So yes, we expect there to be some waste, and cloud absolutely, we're going to see resources that you're paying for that you don't use, and there is a duty of care for the business, both the developers and the FinOps teams, to make sure that we're using the right tools to minimize that waste. I think that disconnect is very real. So the objective for a software developer working in an organization is to innovate to support business, to get new features out into production as rapidly as possible to allow that business differentiation. This is the job of a developer. Whereas the operations and the FinOps teams, they tend to have a more longer view of it. They tend to have a view that is about optimization over time. And I definitely see a closer interaction between FinOps teams and operations. But ultimately, in most cloud deployments, it is the developer of the application who's controlling to a certain extent what resources are used. So I think there is definitely an important place for cloud FinOps tooling. So tooling that allows the FinOps teams to see what's going on in the cloud and to relate it back to the things that make sense to developers. The sort of disconnect that goes on is where the FinOps team says, well, we have a problem with, for the sake of argument, AWS's EC2 service, where we're running maybe 50% of our EC2 instances are only running at 5% utilization. Great. So which developers do I talk to? Because EC2 is used by maybe 2/3 of the applications that we deploy on AWS. And so we need that mapping from these underutilized resources through the applications, the dev teams. And that's one of the challenges in cloud FinOps. The other is that the people who care about the money, the financials team, aren't actually able to make changes. They're not qualified to make changes in the infrastructure that's being deployed out. And so there are two constituencies in any cloud financial operations scenario. One is that people with the financial view who know how much money we're spending and hopefully can allocate it back against the teams that are causing the money to be spent. And really, if they're good, they're also mapping against the value, because reducing the amount that we spend and then as a result being less effective in business and getting less revenue in, that's not a positive thing. One of the biggest challenges is really identifying where spending more actually increases our income, increases our revenue, and is therefore valuable to the business. Then that financial analysis needs to push back into the developers towards, as you're building your application, do have some consideration of size. Do have some consideration in cost. And often that visibility of cost is completely lacking from the developers. So developers may have no idea that there are cost implications to changes that they're making. Now, it might be that they're running functions as a service and are optimizing for performance by using large amounts of memory on their functions, and that's leading to higher cost. They may not have that awareness that to fulfill one of their objectives, they're actually missing another. So there's definitely a place for far better communication between the financials team and the development and production teams or development teams. But it's a really hard thing because there is such a mismatch in the way these teams communicate. So definitely good tooling is going to be important for us in here. Wonderful thing about cloud is you only pay for the resources you use, but the terrible thing about cloud is you pay for all of the resources you use. Make sure you get value for all of the money you're spending in cloud. Yesterday, Aviz Networks announced that they are adding support for NVIDIA Spectrum-X networking to their Open Networking Enterprise Suite. ONES or ones on that one? This allows Aviz to continue to support AI workloads in the networking platforms. Ones was designed to run networking fabrics for AI workloads, and seeing adoption of NVIDIA's premier AI networking technology is a sign that the industry will be quickly adopting the NVIDIA approach. This news comes ahead of the NVIDIA GTC conference later this month, where the integration is expected to be shown by Aviz. Is networking really that important to AI, and is NVIDIA Spectrum-X the standard?
Well, it's quickly looking like it might be. I had a chance to sit down with Vishal Shukla at Aviz and kind of talk through some of this stuff, and it's fascinating to see the way that things are stacking up. Because if you may recall, last week we talked about the fact that Cisco announced that they're going to be announcing support for running Spectrum X in their switches on top of Cisco silicon. You may also know that Aviz Networks has partnered with Cisco to run their operating system on top of Cisco silicon as well as on top of Spectrum X. Do you see how the things are all kind of lining up together? This is one of the things that has me so excited about this industry is that you have to find things that are useful to the industry and build on them. And Viz did that because they have landed on Sonic. Almost everybody in the networking industry knows that Sonic is an open source operating system created initially by Microsoft, but kind of shepherded now by a consortium to really create effectively like a baseline, right? So think of it like a Linux for the Switch, even though yes, there is Linux for switches. This is really starting to drive innovation, and one of the things that Aviz has kind of staked their claim to is this ability to run that operating system along with their management framework on just about anybody's hardware. I mean, it's a great way to look at it, and there's no bigger market out there right now than NVIDIA running Spectrum X, right? Like that's one of the things I talked about last week. Now, if you'll remember when I mentioned it last week, my first thought was, oh, well, that's kind of neat. Maybe this is kind of the tacit admission from NVIDIA that you're not going to be able to break into Cisco only networks with hopes of putting these things down there. And if that had been the only announcement, that's probably where I would have stayed. But this makes it a little bit more interesting because if they're opening this up to a partner like Aviz to be able to run their ONES on top of Spectrum X, that means that they're really kind of focusing on the hardware. And what they're really wanting is other companies to kind of innovate on top of that and to bring that forward to create those kinds of integrations. And that's a big deal because I don't know if you've ever tried to build out an AI network, but it's not easy. Even with you having all of the components and things from a company like NVIDIA, because Spectrum X uses Bluefield DPUs, it uses custom ASICs from NVIDIA, it uses NVLink to get everything running together. Spectrum X, of course, is the Ethernet technology, but you're going to be building on that. You're not going to be building on bog standard Ethernet. And I think that that's an important thing that people need to understand here. But I think what we're going to see down the road is getting these things to be more compatible with each other. And that's an important point because when I was talking to Vishal, one of the things he mentioned was that during NVIDIA GTC, they're actually going to be doing a plug fest. They're going to have people say, well, if you don't believe that Sonic works, bring your stuff and come on in here and let's get it plugged in and let's make sure that it all fits together. And I think that that honestly is refreshing. It goes back to the days of interop, right? Where it's like, we are going to get all this stuff to talk to each other and there's not going to be any weirdness and the protocols are going to work and the proof's in the pudding, right? We need more of that. I think that that is something that's super valuable to the industry, and I applaud Aviz for jumping out there and doing it. So make sure that you check them out if you're at NVIDIA GTC And stay tuned because something tells me there's going to be some more news on the horizon that we're definitely going to be covering here on the rundown. All right, Alistair, we got a closer look that we need to take at something. And of course, I'm going to go into the Wayback Machine. And I want to take you back to the halcyon days of like just a couple weeks ago. You may remember that we were talking about the fact that NVIDIA AI chips were showing up in China, even though there was a US embargo to not let them get that advanced technology. You also may remember, if you turn your Wayback Machine to January, that one of the reasons for this was because the outgoing Biden administration blocked the Chinese from being able to buy these advanced chips like NVIDIA's Haswell. Well, fast forward to today, and now companies like Microsoft are urging the current presidential administration to rescind that ban because boy, oh boy, would they like access to that growing AI market in China. Part of the reason that they are really champing at the bit to make that happen is because Chinese authorities are telling their AI researchers, yeah, don't bother going to the US. Like, they won't let us play on this stuff when we get back home, so why should we allow you to do that? And you'll be completely shocked to learn that third-party entrepreneurs are finding a way to make a fortune by reshipping shipments of restricted items to China from places like Singapore. 3 people in Singapore were just arrested, 2 Singaporean citizens and 1 Chinese citizen, charged with running an operation of the yar har har variety to get some of that equipment over there. All right, Al, that's a lot. Where do you want to start with this?
Well, how about we dig into the Singapore arrests a little bit? Seems like this particular case, so we'll just hit some detail and we'll zoom back out a little later. In this case, there were servers that were manufactured by Dell and Supermicro that may not, probably did, contain NVIDIA chips, and that were supposed to be being delivered to Malaysia, but ended up probably in mainland China or on their way to mainland China. Interesting that both Dell has responded that they are very careful about making sure they comply with sanctions, and Malaysia is not a sanctioned country, so they were absolutely entitled to ship these servers with these GPUs in them. The other two parties, NVIDIA and Supermicro, haven't made any particular statements about this yet, but I'd expect them to have the same sort of idea. They were in good faith shipping hardware to a location that is absolutely valid to receive that hardware. The thought, though, then, is what percentage of the servers that are being bought by these countries that are possibly being used as a sort of transshipment location, what percentage of the servers sold to them actually are used in their locations? It's an interesting thing to start considering, whether the purchases by these countries or by people within these countries. Now, let's be clear. I'm not claiming that anybody involved in the governments of these countries is doing anything wrong here. I believe it's far more likely to be going under the radar in these places. But we start looking in the same way that you look to find an illegal grow operation. It's not yet legal here in New Zealand to grow your own cannabis. Well, you look for excessive power consumption and excessive water consumption as an indicator of an illegal grow operation. Well, excess purchasing of high-end GPUs in a country that maybe isn't actually showing any signs that they're using those GPUs might be a symptom of this transship. And this is one of the challenges with all of the restrictions, right? Is that you restrict a particular country, and then maybe there's other countries that have intermediate relationships. Conversations around this sort of shipments into China coming through from places like Malaysia, Taiwan, Vietnam, places that are physically very close to China and where the Chinese influence is very strong. So yeah, it's not overly surprising that the sort of ship into one country, move into another is happening for the chips. We're more used to this being the black market for arms. Tom, looking at it from the US perspective, which of course I don't completely have, was this move by Biden to restrict chips something that was very popular? Is it something that the current administration is expected to continue?
I really wish I had a good answer for you because there is a very strange disconnect here. the at least the last two presidential administrations, because let's remember that the current president was also the president from 2016 to 2020, have been very antagonistic toward China. It's been very interesting because I don't, as of the recording of this episode, the U.S. just announced a rise in tariffs on things from China. And of course, we know that the way global supply chains work, we're very dependent on getting things from China. But it's funny that this was announced like literally with a week to go before the end of the session of the previous presidential administration. So I guess the question is the current president going to come in and lift the ban to reverse course that something his predecessor had done, which means that China will be able to get access to these markets? Or will he continue the ban in place as is because he has such a distaste for Chinese competition? And if you look up anything about anything he's said over the last 12 years, he's been pretty pointed in his comments about China. So I don't know what the ultimate goal here is. And I'm going to take it one step further because quite honestly, I don't know what Microsoft's ultimate goal is here. I know what NVIDIA's is they want to sell as much as they can to anybody who will buy it. But I got to remind a couple of those companies that you don't just get to do business in China. You have to play by their rules. And remember that one of their rules is that you actually have to sell through a Chinese subsidiary that is 51% owned by a Chinese company. And to illustrate this point, I'd like to make this the very first episode of Gestalt IT Rundown Karaoke. Oh, I never thought the leopards would eat my face. Because as soon as Microsoft gets access to sell AI into China, that company that owns 51% of the company that's selling it in China is going to have access to everything that you have access to. And then they're going to reverse engineer it. And then they're going to appropriate it. And then they're going to kick you out of the country a couple of years later. And yeah, you will have made a lot of money during those 2 years or 3 years or 5 years, however many years it is. And then a suspiciously similar copycat is going to show up and you will never get access to that market again. Now, what's the right answer here? Well, unfortunately, I slept through international politics, and my political science course was all about Watergate. Boy, I remember those days. But like, this is a big, massive problem for U.S. companies because we have been slowly restricting all of the pieces to make semiconductors from China. I mean, most of the lithography machines come out of the Netherlands, and those machines can't get anywhere near mainland China right now. And we've heard rumblings that, there's still that situation between China and their rebel province of Taiwan, which could erupt into some other things. And as I was explaining to a friend of mine the other day, the first thing that happens if there's an invasion of Taiwan is TSMC goes boom. Like they have already said, they will raise those factories to the ground to prevent them from falling into what they consider to be enemy hands. So this could drag out a little further. And I mean, I hate to use the term because it sounds so wrong, but NVIDIA really is an arms dealer here. It's just they're not selling guns or missiles or helicopters like in Lord of War, great Nicolas Cage film. They're selling GPUs and AI accelerators. So, I mean, do you think that the Chinese are just going to accept the fact that they can't get a hold of these things? Or are they going to continue to do what they've evidently been doing all this time?
I think really importantly, we know that the Chinese view of how the world works is a long game. It's, as you say, a few years of Western companies making high profits is a justifiable sacrifice to a long game of success in China and Chinese interests. So we will see this carry on for quite some time. This won't end rapidly. So yeah, I think this is a watch the space and see what's going on. The innovation in China we saw with DeepSeek carries on of let's keep making some noise about these restrictions aren't effective against us.
You know who else plays the long game, Alistair?
Tech Field Day.
Tech Field Day plays the long game because we actually have some events coming up you're not going to want to miss. First one is happening in 2 weeks. That's going to be Networking Field Day 37. We have an exciting lineup of companies that are going to be joining us, and we might be adding some names to that list very shortly. But I'm going to be coming to you from Silicon Valley, and we are going to have a grand old time. I know it's the same week as NVIDIA GTC, but you know what? There's only so many weeks in the year, and we just wanted to be where all the cool kids were. Speaking of which, I'm going to fast forward to April because we have a big announcement. Tech Field Day is going to be coming to Houston for HPE. We are going to be having a special HPE ProLiant Compute event. That's going to be hosted by your buddy and mine, Mr. Stephen Foskett. He is going to be bringing together some great influencers from across the compute space to be talking to our friends over at HPE. And it's going to be an exciting time. But one person who will not be there is Mr. Alistair Cook, because Al, you've got something going on.
I do have something going on. The week of April 23rd and 24th is going to be a monstrous week for AI Infrastructure Field Day. It really is shaping up to be the biggest Tech Field Day event I personally have been involved in, and could not be more excited for having this range of companies that are going to be with us. Then, of course, it becomes a Tom show for a little while in May, while I get to have a nice, quiet May. Tom, you're going to be here, there, and everywhere.
Well, exactly. And in the words of NSYNC, when they wanted to figure out when Tom was going to be busiest, it's going to be May, because in May 7th, the 8th, we are going to have Mobility Field Day. Do I even need to say any more at this point? You know, it is some of the biggest names in the mobility and wireless space. It is some of the biggest companies in the mobility and wireless space. Yeah, even including that one. And they're all going to be presenting, and it's going to be fun for everybody. And then at the end of the month, once all of the security risks have died down, it's going to be time for Security Field Day. Going to be coming to you live once again from Silicon Valley. We have some great companies that are lined up for that one already. And of course, we're always adding more. In fact, I just sent out all the information for our delegate lineup. So you should be seeing names getting added to the website very shortly. And of course, you know that your home for all things related to Tech Field Day is techfieldday.com. That's going to do it for this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Remember, every Wednesday, we are back with you, whether it's on our website at gestaltit.com, so you can watch the video along with the show notes and see our funny intros. You can check out our YouTube channel if you want to do away with the funny intros and just get to the talking heads part. Or if you don't like our heads, you can always listen to us in your favorite podcast application of choice, whether it's Apple Podcast or Spotify or Overcast or whatever it is you use. And don't forget to subscribe to some of the other Future Room Group podcasts that are going on out there. Infrastructure Matters, or 5G Factor, or 6.5 Live, whatever it is. We'd love for you to check out some of our coworkers because they work just as hard as we do. And in fact, some cases probably harder than we do, because I know I just kind of show up and say what's on the paper. But the important thing is that we're always going to be keeping an eye out for news. And I'm sure by next week, we're going to have some news leading up to NVIDIA GTC. We're going to have some post-Mobile World Congress news. I know that we're going to have some great coverage from the folks that are over there. But the important thing is that we'll be bringing it all to you through the magic of the internet and video. So for myself, Alistair Cook, Stephen Foskett, and all the wonderful people who do this Gestalt IT Rundown thing every week, thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourself, and let's work off that Fat Tuesday hangover as best we can. We'll see you next week.